Like many couples, Anthony Elonis and his significant other, Tara, were in love, or at least they thought they were. So, akin to the many, they got married. But, like many, the marriage turned sour. The naturally distraught Mr. Elonis chooses to cope with this stressful event in not an unusual way, complaining about his ex online. But these statements excelled far beyond the average. She's such an insert profanity here. Mr. Elonis fancied himself to be a rap artist of sorts and began posting under the name Tone Doogie on Facebook violent rap lyrics with ex-Mrs. Elonis as the subject. One such post said, I quote, "There's one way to love you, but 1,000 ways to kill you." He said he was not going to rest until she was dead, covered in cuts. These alleged threats escalated to the point of Tara obtaining a restraining order. Even this restraining order did not stop him, leading to him posting about shooting up an elementary school. This got the FBI involved. An agent questioned Mr. Elonis at his home, but after she left, he posted more rap lyrics with her at the center. Mr. Elonis was then brought to the Eastern Pennsylvania District Court on 5 accounts of threats. These threats were classified under a federal statute reading, "Whoever transmits in interstate or foreign commerce any communication containing any threat to kidnap any person or any threat to injure the person of another shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 5 years or both." Basically, threatening people is illegal under the First Amendment's free speech protections. The court ruled using the language of the statute. First, we must see the build-up to Elonis versus United States with similar cases. One of the first threat cases dealt with in the Supreme Court was the 1942 case Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire. Walter Chaplinsky decided to publicly declare a city marshal and enforcement officer several unsavory names. The court decided that the First Amendment did not protect these things because they were simply words to stir up violence rather than add anything to the conversation. In 1969, Robert Watts also had choice words to say, but against the President of the United States. "If they ever make me carry a rifle, the first man I want to get in my sights is LBJ." The justices of the Supreme Court ruled that these statements were protected because of the context. These things were said in a debate with an audience present who laughed at the statement. The most recent case of threats was Virginia versus Black in 2003. Several cases were combined dealing with a Virginian statute making cross burnings illegal if done with the motive of intimidating others. Barry Black, Richard Elliott, and Jonathan O'Mara were all convicted under this statute for cross burnings as they were KKK members. These three appealed to the Supreme Court. Virginia assumed wrongly, the court said, that all cross burnings were done with the intent of making others scared. It was decided in this case that the First Amendment did not protect true threats, where the speaker means the statement as a threat. The Pennsylvania District Court in Elonis v. United States agreed with the prosecution that the language of the federal statute Mr. Elonis was accused of violating did not contain any words requiring a need to show his intent. The prosecution argued based on a very literal reading of the statute, including no similar statutes or laws, saying that the statute had no requirement for Mr. Elonis's criminal intent to be proven, making any interstate threat punishable. Therefore, the court convicted him based solely on if a reasonable person could determine his statements to be threats, disregarding his intent altogether. Mr. Elonis appealed, arguing that the precedent in Virginia v. Black required subjective intent, his motive to threaten, to be shown. At the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, the lower court's decision was held, and Mr. Elonis was forced to appeal to the Supreme Court. The American Bar Association submitted an amicus brief on behalf of several groups interested in free speech for Mr. Elonis, stating that the reason crude speech is protected by the First Amendment is to keep discussion open. Without taking intent into account, they argue, protected but crude speech may be considered unlawful. Criminalizing this speech would inhibit free debate. The Anti-Defamation League, which fights against discrimination and hate, especially online, disagrees, stating that making threats illegal is to protect the public from the fear that these statements arouse. If the purpose of the exception of threats from free speech laws is to protect the people, statements that are taken as threats should be punished. The Supreme Court heard all arguments and ruled using the language of the statute. In an 8-1 majority decision in favor of Mr. Elonis, given by Justice Roberts, the court ruled that because many surrounding statutes contained an intent requirement in the crime, it was assumed that it could be part of the threat statute as well. The majority also went on to say that a guilty mind is important to every criminal case and should be applied to true threats as well. Justice Thomas dissents from the majority, believing only a feeling of fear in the victim of the threat is necessary to convict. He also explains that the majority did not help to clear up precedent after Virginia v. Black. As was seen in this case, Virginia v. Black's decision was not always read literally as the Supreme Court stated, and Elonis v. United States should have fixed this division. The problem with the decision in the Supreme Court in this case is that it focused on the language of one statute rather than other issues. The First Amendment could have been revisited, the precedent of threat cases could have been set in stone, even the use of the internet and interstate threats could have been debated, but instead the decision focused on U.S. Federal Statute 875C. This still leaves lower courts uncertain, and the issue of true threats will likely have to be revisited sometime in the near future.